My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 71 years old. The morning air in Charleston was thick with heat and salt. I had come to the courthouse early, the way I always used to when I worked there, walking slowly up the marble steps. I did not see Valerie until her voice cut through the crowd. "There you are," she said, her tone sharp enough to make people turn. "You filthy old woman. You still think you belong here." I stopped halfway up. My daughter-in-law stood at the top of the stairs in a pale suit and high heels that clicked like punctuation marks. Her hair was perfect, her lipstick fresh. Behind her, my son Michael watched without a word, hands buried in his pockets as if this scene were something he had already accepted. Before I could speak, Valerie's hand flashed across my face. The sound cracked against the stone columns, startling a few people nearby. The sting burned, but not as much as the silence that followed. No one moved. Lawyers, clerks, security, all frozen, pretending not to stare yet unable to look away. I touched my cheek. "Valerie," I said softly. "That was unnecessary. You should have stayed home," she hissed. "You embarrass this family every time you show your face." I looked at Michael. He lowered his eyes. For a moment, I felt the same old ache that comes when you realize your child will not defend you, not out of cruelty, but out of cowardice. I drew a slow breath, tasting the dust in the air. My voice came out calm, almost gentle. 10 minutes. "Valerie, 10 minutes." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" I did not answer. I turned slightly, stepping aside to let a pair of paralegals pass. They hurried by without meeting my eyes. Valerie's confidence flickered. She was not used to me standing still when she pushed. The heat rose against the back of my neck. I felt my pulse steady. I had spent a lifetime holding back my voice so others could speak louder. But this time, silence was my choice, not my weakness. Valerie muttered something under her breath and strode toward the courthouse doors. Michael followed, still looking at the ground. I stayed there a little longer, feeling the echo of that slap fade into the morning hum. Then I adjusted the strap of my bag and began walking not through the front doors, but toward the narrow side entrance reserved for courthouse staff. It had been years since I used that hallway, but today, I knew exactly where it led. The side hallway smelled the same as it always had: old paper, faint coffee, a trace of polished wood. I nodded to the security guard at the end. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, then paused. "Or should I say counselor?" I smiled. "Old habits die hard, don't they?" He chuckled, pressing the button that opened the staff door. "You always belonged here more than most." Inside, the corridors were quieter. My shoes made soft sounds against the floor as I passed the clerk's office. Patricia looked up from her desk, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. "Well, I'll be damned," she said, "if it isn't Eleanor Whitmore. Thought retirement had you painting seashells by now." "Not quite," I said. "Thomas asked me to take a small pro bono case, just for a few weeks." She grinned. "Good to have you back. You still scare half the junior lawyers without trying." I set my bag down on the desk and opened the thin case file. A business dispute, construction delays, payment conflicts. The kind of case that came down to patience and paperwork. Routine. My eyes moved steadily until they reached the plaintiff's name. Valerie Logan. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. The letters blurred slightly before settling again, sharp and black. Patricia kept talking beside me, but her voice faded into background noise. My hands stayed still, though I could feel the tremor building deep in my chest. I closed the file slowly. "Could you let Thomas know I'll handle this one myself?" Patricia's eyebrows lifted. "That bad?" I met her eyes. "That personal?" She nodded once, understanding without another word. I lifted the file again. heavier now than any case I had ever carried, and walked toward the conference room. Michael was 15 when his father died, the night the doctor called. I sat on the edge of the bed and folded my hands until my fingers went numb. There wasn't time to grieve. There were bills to pay and a boy to raise. "I can quit baseball," he'd said, trying to sound grown. "No," I told him. "You play. I'll figure the rest out." I did. I took every extra shift the firm would give me, paralegal work. Filings, late-night document reviews. When the others went home, I stayed, reading case law with a thermos of coffee that went cold before midnight. One of the senior partners stopped by once and said, "You should apply to law school. You're doing half the work of a lawyer already." I laughed it off. But that night, after Michael fell asleep, I filled out the application. I studied at the kitchen table, surrounded by his textbooks and the hum of the refrigerator. Sometimes he'd wake up and find me there. "Mom, you're still awake." "Just reviewing," I'd say, hiding the outlines behind the newspaper. Years passed. I graduated, passed the bar, and started from the bottom again. I was proud, though I rarely said it. When Michael was accepted to university, I gave him the tuition check without mentioning that it came from selling my car. "You always make it work," he told me once. "That's what mothers do," I answered. Then came Valerie, beautiful, ambitious, confident in all the ways I wasn't. Michael glowed when he was near her. I wanted to like her, and I tried. "The first dinner we shared," she asked, "and what did you used to do?" "Eleanor, I worked in law," I said carefully. "Clerical?" she asked, smiling politely. Something inside me shrank. "Yes," I said, "clerical." From then on, I stopped mentioning the courtroom, the late nights, the long climb I had made alone. It seemed easier to disappear a little, to let them have their perfect picture of success without me in the frame. I told myself it was love, that making myself smaller would make them feel larger, safer. But somewhere between her wedding speech and the first time she corrected the way I spoke at dinner, I realized I had become exactly what I had pretended to be invisible. It happened on a quiet afternoon, months before the courthouse steps. Michael had stopped by to find his father's old insurance papers. He left his phone on the kitchen table while he searched in the study. The screen lit up with a message. I didn't mean to look, but the name Valerie appeared in bold letters, and my eyes caught a few words before I could look away. I already spoke to the attorney. We can have her declared incompetent in 6 months. The house is worth about $200,000. We sell it and split the money. She'll never know. The words blurred, then sharpened again. I read them 3 times. My hands went cold, but my face stayed still. Michael's footsteps approached. I placed the phone exactly where it had been and poured coffee into his cup. "Find what you needed?" I asked. He smiled, distracted. "Yeah, thanks." "Mom, take the folder," I said, steadying my voice. "Drive safely." He kissed my cheek absent, thoughtless, and left. I stood there listening to the sound of his car pulling away, the silence that followed, and the low hum of the refrigerator. Then I sat down at the table and stared at my hands. For years, I had imagined every kind of disappointment a mother could feel, but never this one. They weren't planning to forget me, they were planning to erase me. I opened my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in years, Thomas Avery. I had trained him fresh out of law school, watched him stumble and learn until he became one of the sharpest attorneys in Charleston. He answered on the second ring, "Mrs. Whitmore." "What a surprise! I need your help." "Thomas." My voice was calm, almost detached. "And this time, it's personal." A pause. Then, quietly, "Tell me everything." I looked toward the window, the sunlight cutting across the floor. "It's time," I said. I stopped pretending to be helpless. Thomas was the one who suggested I volunteer again. A few pro bono cases, He said, "It'll keep you sharp and distract you." I hesitated. "I'm retired, Thomas." He smiled faintly. "You're retired from salary, not from purpose." 2 weeks later, I sat in the courthouse conference room, signing the volunteer forms. The clerk handed me a thin file. "Small commercial case." She said, "Construction dispute, routine." I thanked her and opened it while she moved on to the next volunteer. My eyes skimmed the first page, the names of the parties until I saw it. Plaintiff Valerie Logan. The pen slipped in my hand. I closed the folder slowly and felt the weight of it settle in my lap. Thomas noticed. Problem, I looked up at him. You could call it that. When I told him, he leaned back. Thoughtful. "It's not illegal." He said carefully, "You're not representing family and you're not a judge on the case, but it's delicate, delicate." I repeated. "That's one word for it." He studied me. "Eleanor, you need to be sure. If this becomes about payback, it isn't." I said. "She brought her arrogance into the law. I'll bring the law to her arrogance." He sighed, knowing there was no point arguing. "Then at least check the ethics code. Protect yourself." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the code book open beside me. Every clause confirmed what I already knew: no conflict of interest, no rule violated, only the risk of appearing personal. I signed the acceptance form in neat blue ink. Thomas called the next morning. "So, you took it?" "Yes." I said, "Assignment or accident, it doesn't matter." She wanted me erased. I'm here to remind her I still exist. The file sat open on my desk for days before I touched it. Every time I saw Valerie's name printed in bold, I had to remind myself this was work, not war. When I finally began, I read everything twice. Contracts, payment logs, change orders. It was all there, but the numbers didn't add up. The invoices were altered, dates overwritten, signatures smudged. A contractor's statement had been quietly replaced by a cleaner version, one that favored Valerie's client. I marked each discrepancy in red ink until the pages looked like they were bleeding. Thomas dropped by one afternoon, carrying his usual paper cup of coffee. "You're at it again," he said, glancing at the stack beside me. "You don't know how to slow down. Slow work misses the truth." I said, "She's careless, overconfident. That's how I'll win." He sat across from me, setting his cup down. "You sound like someone who's chasing satisfaction, not justice." I looked up. "And you sound like someone who's forgotten what justice feels like." Thomas exhaled slowly. "Eleanor, I'm serious. Don't confuse justice with revenge. You're better than that." I held his gaze. "I'm not angry." "Thomas, I'm awake. There's a difference." He leaned back, quiet for a moment. "What happens when she realizes who you are, then she'll remember who she isn't." I said. He smiled faintly, though his eyes stayed heavy. "You used to teach me to separate feeling from fact." "I still do," I answered, "and the facts are on my side." When he left, I returned to the documents. Each inconsistency was another thread to pull, another lie waiting to unravel. I felt calm, almost steady. The fear I'd carried for years was gone. Before turning off the lamp, I whispered to the empty room, "Justice is my peace." The words didn't sound like defiance. They sounded like truth I had waited a lifetime to say. Valerie arrived late, as if the world waited for her. Her heels struck the marble floor like applause she believed she deserved. She adjusted her jacket, handed her assistant a folder, and smiled at the bailiff as if she owned the room. I sat at the defense table, reviewing the case file one last time. The courtroom hummed with low conversation, the kind that fades just before a storm, when the clerk stood and announced, "Case number 9847, Logan Construction versus Fairview Development. Counselors, please identify yourselves. Valerie spoke first. Valerie Logan for the plaintiff, she said smoothly. The clerk nodded toward me. Counselor Whitmore for the defense. The sound of my name cut through the room. Valerie froze. She turned her head slowly, as if she hadn't heard right. Our eyes met. The color drained from her face. I gave her a small, polite nod. Good morning, Counselor. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her assistant leaned close, whispering her name. The silence stretched until the judge cleared his throat. Shall we begin? He said. Valerie blinked hard, shuffled her papers, and forced a brittle smile. Of course, Your Honor. Her opening argument stumbled. The confidence she wore like armor cracked with every misplaced fact. She cited the wrong invoice number, misquoted a clause, confused dates. When it was my turn, I rose slowly. Your Honor, the plaintiff claims the materials were delivered on time. Exhibit D shows otherwise. I passed the document to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Valerie tried to interrupt. That's not, I continued. My tone measured. The delivery receipt was altered. The original shows a 3-week delay, signed by her own client's foreman. The judge looked over his glasses. Counselor Logan, is that correct? Valerie hesitated. There must be a mistake. There is, I said, turning another page. Right here, where the date was changed by hand. Each correction was precise. Clinical, without malice. I didn't raise my voice or look at her again. The courtroom didn't need spectacle. It needed truth. From the corner of my eye, I saw Michael sitting in the gallery. His face was pale, his hands clenched on his knees. He looked between Valerie and me as if seeing both for the first time. Valerie's assistant tried to slide her another folder, but she pushed it away. Your Honor, she began again, her voice trembling now. These inconsistencies don't change the essence of our claim. They change everything, the judge said quietly. When the hearing recessed for lunch, Valerie remained seated, staring at her papers as though they might rearrange themselves into something coherent. The bailiff moved toward her, but she waved him off. I gathered my documents and stood. The judge gave me a nod of acknowledgement, professional, respectful, final. As I stepped away from the table, Valerie looked up. Her voice was barely a whisper. You planned this. I paused. No. I said evenly, you did. The day you thought I was beneath you. Michael stood as I passed. His eyes glassy, his mouth parted but wordless. Outside, the hallway was bright and quiet. For the first time in years, I walked through it without shrinking. The truth had already spoken. It didn't need me to shout. It never did. The courtroom doors swung open behind me, releasing a wave of murmurs and footsteps. I had almost reached the end of the corridor when I heard him. Mom, wait. Michael's voice carried the same tremor he'd had as a boy when he'd broken something he couldn't fix. I turned. He was standing in the middle of the hallway, tie loose. Eyes wide. Why didn't you tell me? He said, breathless. Why didn't you tell me who you were? I looked at him carefully. I told you. I said, you just never listened. He shook his head. I thought you worked clerical stuff. Valerie said, yes. I interrupted. She said a lot of things. And you believed all of them. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, then stopped. I didn't know. Mom, I swear I didn't know any of this. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the folded page I had kept with me, the printed message Valerie had sent, and a copy of my will. I handed them to him. She planned to have me declared incompetent, to sell my house, to decide where I would live, what I would own, who I would be. Michael read the first line. His face drained of color. She said it was for your safety. I met his eyes. And you believed her. Because it was easier than asking me the truth. He lowered his head, voice breaking. I thought I was protecting you. No, Michael, I said softly. You were protecting your peace. He didn't answer. The papers hung loosely in his hand, the air heavy between us. I turned toward the elevator. When you're ready to see who I really am, I said, you know where to find me. Thomas called 2 days after the hearing. It's done, he said. The board has the files, every falsified invoice, every altered signature. I closed my eyes for a moment. So it's official. They've opened a formal investigation, he replied. Valerie won't be practicing for a long time. Maybe ever. I didn't feel relief, just stillness. I won't testify. I said, let the evidence speak. It's stronger than I am. Thomas hesitated. You're sure I'm sure, I said quietly. Justice doesn't need my anger to stand. That afternoon, Michael came by unannounced. He stood on my porch, a shadow of the man who once walked past me without seeing me. I resigned. He said before I could speak, I can't work at the firm anymore, not after what she did. What I let happen. I nodded. Then start over. Build something honest. He swallowed hard. Mom, I don't deserve has nothing to do with it. I interrupted. Do better, that's enough. He stepped forward, eyes wet. I'm sorry. I touched his arm. So am I. But sorry isn't the end, it's the beginning, when he left. I sat at the kitchen table with the window open to the afternoon air. Somewhere across town, Valerie would be facing her own silence, the kind that comes when there's no one left to impress. The truth had cost more than I ever planned to pay, but it had also bought me back my name. Months passed quietly. I began teaching a short course on legal ethics at the Charleston School of Law. The students called me Professor Whitmore, a title that made me smile more than I expected. They didn't know my story, only the lessons I wanted them to remember: truth without cruelty, strength without pride. Each evening, I walked home through the soft coastal air and turned on the small porch light by my door. It had become a quiet ritual, not for waiting, not for hoping, just to remind myself that I was still here. One afternoon, the mailman handed me an envelope written in Michael's handwriting. Inside was a short letter. Mom, the girls have been asking about you. They'd like to visit next weekend. I read it twice, feeling warmth rise in my chest. I walked to the window and looked out at the fading light. The lamp outside flickered once, then steadied, casting its glow across the porch. The light's on, I whispered. It wasn't an invitation or an apology. It was a promise to myself, to the life I had rebuilt, and to the peace I had earned. One quiet evening at a time.